Barbarian and Weapons are easily two of my favorite horror flicks from this decade so far. So what else is writer-director Zach Cregger getting up to? Let's talk all about some of his upcoming projects in today's video.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
I want to be a fighter, like you.
Oh, let it burn! Let it burn!
Did you miss me?
You have to shoot them in the head. They always come back.
The boat can leave now. Tell the crew.
But sometimes that is better.
Good luck.
Zach Cregger is a guy who needs absolutely no introduction after his major splash in the horror scene this decade. Both of his horror films that he's put out this decade have really impressed horror audiences, with shocking broken narrative structures and a slight comedic tone without ever forgetting to be scary. The comedy elements of his movies should come at no surprise for fans of Cregger's previous works. If you're like me, you probably watched his comedy troupe, The Whitest Kids You Know, on the bus ride to school every morning. Some of those skits are burned into my brain, infecting my daily lexicon, to my fiance's dismay. I cannot tell you how many times I've referenced this segment to crickets.
Now you fucked up! Now you fucked up! Now you have fucked up!
Whether you like his movies or not, Cregger has undoubtedly made his mark on the space of horror. His second horror feature, Weapons, was nominated for numerous accolades, and Aunt Gladys actress Amy Madigan even took home an Oscar for her villainous performance. That rarely happens in horror, and when it does, it needs to be championed. Something else that I think is interesting about Zach's influence is that some critics are calling this year's biggest horror hit from Mr. Curry Barker a little too inspired by his films. IndieWire's Christian Zilko said in his review of Obsession that it was proof that the Cregerification of 2020's horror is in full effect, as its combination of sadistic violence, ironic needle drops, and comedy mined from people responding to tragedy in pathetically self-serving ways will merit plenty of comparisons to Barbarian and Weapons. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that Curry Barker and Zach Cregger's flavor are very similar, but these two creatives spin very different yarns. For example, if Zach Cregger directed Obsession, I imagine 30 minutes into that film, we would have been dropped into a flashback of Ian and Nikki hooking up before the wish was made. Instead, in the Curry Barker movie, that information was relayed to us through dialogue later on in the film. Cutting away from the whole Curry Barker to Zach Cregger comparison though, Zach always puts a lot of effort into fleshing out all of his various characters, especially in Weapons. With entire chapters of that film focusing on different characters' perspective around the same events, it lends itself to deeper character understandings as well as types of shocks that just aren't present in some other modern day horror. That kind of non-linear storytelling is something that I think will be prevalent in a lot of Zach Cregger's work to come. Well, maybe not this one though. Cregger's next project is a brand new take on the Resident Evil franchise. This movie comes in the wake of a previous reboot that was sadly a commercial failure. Sometimes I feel like the only person who really enjoyed 2021's Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, Johannes Roberts' flavor of popcorn movies has always been my jam. Everything from Strangers Prey at Night to 47 Meters Down to this year's Primate really worked for me despite some formulaic scripts. Welcome to Raccoon City is no different than those movies. The center of the discourse surrounding the last Resident Evil film, however, is probably the dissonant conjunction of the first two Resident Evil games squished together. I personally vibed with it, featuring what is easily the best movie versions of the Resident Evil characters thus far and a terrifying sequence at the Spencer Mansion. I think it failed because it didn't ultimately tell a new story in this elaborate universe. It kinda just rehashes the first two games with underwhelming results. This upcoming reboot is learning its lesson and allowing Zach to make his own inspired vision of Resident Evil, which I think makes the most sense after the previous box office bomb. Some fans would disagree and just want the studio to make another Welcome to Raccoon City film, but I also feel that those are the same fans who didn't show up for the previous movie. I think Resident Evil is in good hands with Zach based on a lot of the things that he's been saying in some of these early interviews, unlike some of the vocal minority online. The 2026 film takes place during an alternate and modern day version of the outbreak in Raccoon City. It follows a medical courier named Brian, played by Austin Abrams, who must deliver a package to the hospital in the midst of a viral outbreak. This film has a much smaller cast than Cregger's previous outing, but still features some great performers, including Zach Cherry from Severance, professional boxer Callie Reese, and the criminally underrated Paul Walter Hauser, all three of which will portray Umbrella scientists. I think think it's especially interesting that a lot of the supporting cast there are former boxers. And this movie was also co-written by John Wick's sequel scribe Shay Hatton. The trailer may showcase some nasty creatures, but I think the film itself will lean much more into action horror than we even know. Cregger has even distinguished this film from his previous efforts, saying it's way less weapons than Barbarian and much more Evil Dead 2. That makes me think this movie isn't going to have that broken narrative structure, but rather one continuous thing going on following a single character to increase the tension. We're just focused on one man's descent into hell, essentially. Cregger has also said that once this movie gets going, it's non-stop until the moment it ends. I don't look at this as a criticism of Barbarian or Weapons, but there are times where the tension breaks because we're cutting to different stories. I don't think that's a bad thing, and actually it lends itself to some greater shocks along the way. But I think if you want to do a film that's similar to Evil Dead 2 in the sense that it's one guy being tortured in this awful situation, this is the way to do it. I'm personally really excited to see Zach Cregger's take on one of my all-time favorite video game franchises. I love the silly Paul W.S. Anderson movies because I grew up with them, but I'm also willing to admit that they're not that great at the end of the day. I think this could be the first truly fantastic Resident Evil film in the franchise. This one drops in just a couple of months here on September 18th in theaters. It was announced at CinemaCon this past April that Zach Cregger would be writing and directing a brand new space horror film called The Flood. Originally a Netflix original, the film is now being produced by New Line, Warner Bros., and Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment. I guess Spielberg was a real big fan of Weapons, even stating, "When I see a great horror film like Weapons, I don't have an itch I need to scratch. I see Weapons and it doesn't make me want to make a horror film that's as scary or scarier than Weapons. It satisfies me so completely it actually arrests my desire to someday make a really scary movie." That is high praise from the most influential director of all time. If I were Zach Cregger hearing that shit, I would just cream my pants. Our first plot details on the film came from Dread Central, around the same time, with editor-in-chief Brad Miska stating, "The Flood is very Alien-esque, following a deep space captain who leads her crew to investigate a cryptic signal from a distant world, only to uncover an alien artifact that warps time, reality, and their sanity, forcing them into a confrontation with an incomprehensible intelligence." Going back to what we were saying at the top of this video, I think The Flood is going to reintroduce us to Zach Cregger's broken narrative, non-linear structure, but in a way we've never seen it done before. Upon discovering this alien artifact, I think the crew is constantly going to be changing up reality in all sorts of fucked up ways, leading to cosmic horrors beyond human understanding. My theory is that the crew is going to be messing with space-time to the point where some things never happened, some people never existed, a new person is now suddenly a part of the crew, and it's impossible to keep up with. Maybe we're even traveling through time in ways that completely fuck up everything that is going on with this group of characters. The horrors of this story isn't necessarily the aliens, but their technology that has fallen into hands of people who don't understand how to use it. If it's something along those lines, I am so interested in this. That sounds great. Can we also get some necromorphs from Dead Space walking around this spaceship? That would be awesome. It's a great time to be a fan of the space horror genre, by the way, because not only is Zach Cregger working on one of these puppies, but also Brandon Cronenberg is making this mysterious space horror film called Dragon. That is two of my favorite working directors right now making space horror films. I couldn't be more excited for either of these projects. The Flood arrives in theaters on August 18th of 2028, which I know is a long wait, but just less than a month after that, we're getting another Zach Cregger project. Also announced at CinemaCon this past year is a prequel to Weapons titled GLADYS. It's based on a deleted chapter of Weapons that focuses on Aunt Gladys's backstory and where she came from. Zach ultimately decided that Weapons was better off without this subplot, keeping her backstory mysterious. The prequel is co-written by Zach Shields, who is best known for working on a plethora of Michael Dougherty projects like Krampus, Godzilla King of the Monsters, and all of those cute little Trick or Treat shorts. Shields is also credited for working on the outline for Trick or Treat 2, but I just don't know if that movie is ever going to happen now. Please, horror gods, give us that sequel, I beg of you! While I definitely don't need a prequel to Weapons, I think it's a perfect little standalone. I'm definitely going to be seeing this. Obviously, the film is going to be more than just that deleted section of Weapons, and they've likely built an all-new story surrounding Gladys's past. Maybe this film can make Gladys a more sympathetic character once we understand where she came from and why she had to do what she did. Think about what Ty West and Mia Goth were able to pull off in Pearl and how that deepens the old lady version of that character in X. I don't know if I ever actually found myself rooting for Pearl, but I definitely sympathize with her even more after seeing the prequel film. Is she totally despicable, evil, self-serving, all of those things? Absolutely yes. But do I feel a little bad for her that she was stuck on that farm her whole life? Also kinda yes. I'm guessing this GLADYS prequel is going to be that same performance-forward kind of story. I don't think it's going to be a broken narrative like Weapons, or I don't think it's going to be treated like a Weapons sequel. I think this movie is going to put Amy Madigan's horror icon in the center, make her the focus of this brand new prequel. As the title would suggest, I think it's all about the Oscar winner here. You also have to consider that Amy Madigan was only a small but very crucial part of Weapons. With Zach Shields co-writing this movie, I can't help but think that somehow they're going to turn GLADYS into like a cryptid style villain very similar to Sam in Trick or Treat or Krampus in Krampus. But I think that also runs the risk of over-explaining this character and making her not as interesting. I'm excited for this film, don't get me wrong, but we don't need a Weapons sequel, prequel, anything else. I would hate to ruin the ambiguity of Weapons, one of the most important things about it. One last thing to note about GLADYS is that at this time, there's no director currently slated to be helming the project. I don't think it's totally unlikely that Zach Cregger directs the prequel, but he will be working on The Flood at the same time as this one. I'm guessing that they're gonna get somebody else to direct this one. GLADYS arrives in theaters on September 8th of 2028, less than a month after Zach Cregger's The Flood hits theaters that same year. So we got a twofer in fall of 2028 for Mr. Zach Cregger. This is crazy. The best part is, we're not even done with this video. There's still one more big project that he's attached to. The latest project that's been announced for Zach Cregger is that he'll be writing a SIRENhead movie based off of the Trevor Henderson design. Just to get this out of the way, many fans have asked if Trevor Henderson will be involved with this project, and he's confirmed on his social media pages that he'll serve as an executive producer on the flick. Warner Bros. Won the bidding war for the rights and naturally gave it to their star horror filmmaker, Zach Cregger. This time around though, Zach is just co-writing the film with writer-director Brian Duffield. Zach Cregger deservedly gets a lot of praise. I love his two movies so far, and I can't wait for pretty much every project we have talked about in today's video. But Brian Duffield, man, he is another name that I think more people should look out for. Brian helmed the criminally underrated No One Will Save You for Hulu a few years ago. I think it's one of the better alien invasion flicks to come out in recent memory, and totally flew under the radar. I really loved that one for being a fresh take on such a familiar concept. You've definitely seen alien invasion movies done before, but not like this. Highly recommend if you haven't seen that one. Duffield also has an exciting new thriller releasing this year called Whalefall that looks crazy intense. It follows Austin Abrams, a Zach Cregger regular, as a scuba diver who gets swallowed by a sperm whale. The trailer alone had me on the edge of my seat, and I am dying to see this one in theaters this fall. These bizarre film projects make Brian Duffield like the perfect choice to do a SIRENhead movie. For those who are unfamiliar, SIRENhead is a large skeletal giant with two sirens where his head should be. He stalks and hunts people, camouflaging himself amongst trees and telephone poles. He can also project terrifying sounds or mimic people to lure out potential victims. It's a terrifying creature that is just so not grounded at all. I think it can only exist in a very surreal horror film. It's also important to note about this project that this was shortly announced after Backrooms had a crazy amount of success at the box office this past month. Hollywood execs have been mining Reddit for different creepypasta stories to turn into horror movies. SIRENhead is getting a feature adaptation. The Mandela Catalog, I think, is coming from Spielberg. All these huge directors are working on all these crazy different like creepypasta stories. I love it. I will be seated for all of them. Can we get a better take on Slender Man though? Keeping my fingers crossed on that last one because the first Slender Man movie was yikes. Man, I am so excited for all of these different projects, but which one has you the most hyped? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.